And it's time for Media Watch now with Emma James. Good evening, Emma.
Hi there.
And neat segue, you've been looking at exactly the story and how it's been playing out online, the 50th anniversary.
Yes, of course, and the 50th anniversary really at a time in the United States when there is an awful lot of reflection going on about the state of race relations. And I think the New York Daily News has really managed to hit the nail on the head. It's asking the question that so many people are asking today on its front page. 50 years later, what would he think? And if you notice, behind that very recognisable silhouette are the images of many young black people who have lost their lives as a result of police brutality, or in the case of Trayvon Martin, they have not seen their killers, they have not seen justice done. Because, of course, Trayvon Martin, the teenager killed by somebody who thought of himself as a great hero and a neighbourhood watch type person, he was not convicted of murder, of course, as we now know. And it is the question that many people are asking: what would Martin Luther King make of the state of the United States today? The Daily News headline says, "We've come here today to dramatise a shameful condition." They've made their judgment on how the US is right now and how it's doing in terms of civil rights. They've highlighted this particular quote from Martin Luther King: "We can never be satisfied as long as the Negro is the victim of the unspeakable horrors of police brutality." There are many issues obviously being highlighted today as a result of this anniversary. The Atlantic is a very good place to take a look. They have a digital and a print edition, a special edition, all devoted to Martin Luther King Jr. And if you are going to take a look at just one article, I would advise you to take a look at quite a few because they are very interesting. But if you're going to look at just one, it has to be this one, written by Bernice King, the youngest daughter of Martin Luther King. She was just 5 years old when he was assassinated. And I think that's the one that I kind of picked to look at because it's one of very few that is actually optimistic. A lot of people talking about we've made no progress, we've gone nowhere in 50 years. But this one is a voice of optimism. She says, "We cannot afford to regard as normal the presence of injustice, inhumanity and violence, including their verbal and cyber manifestations," really bringing the words of her father up to date to the 21st century, talking, of course, about the kind of cyberbullying that goes on and the kind of incitement of hatred, really, that we see online so often, especially doing what we do here. She says we must not accept the unacceptable. And she talks about her father's belief that there was a world house, a diverse multicultural house in which every nation represents one room. And for the house to survive, we cannot look away when one of those rooms is ablaze. And of course, that could be applied to so many different places around the world.
I was just going to say, more relevant now than ever as the globe shrinks and as there's increasingly, multicultural societies everywhere.
Absolutely.
Not everywhere, but a lot of places.
And looking at the coverage in the UK's Guardian newspaper, they have an excellent article which talks all about what actually happened to the legacy of Martin Luther King. The headline here: "How a rebel leader was lost to history." A lot of people talking about the way in which Martin Luther King's legacy has been airbrushed, some say whitewashed, in order to make it more acceptable to the kind of the white narrative, if you like. Now, Gary Young is the author of this piece, and he says, predicts really that the US will go into an orgy of self-congratulations, selectively misrepresenting King's life and work to mark this 50th anniversary of his assassination. And what they're omitting to talk about is the fact that he was on his way to becoming something of a pariah when he was killed. And in this article, he lists a number of comments that were made in big publications just a few days before King was assassinated, including the New York Times talking about a protest that he'd organised which turned violence, where events were a powerful embarrassment to him, was how they put it. The Providence Sunday Journal called him reckless and irresponsible, and the Dallas Morning News carried a column in which they called King the headline-hunting high priest of non-violent violence, whose roadshow in Memphis was like a torchbearer sprinting into a powder house. And those words were written just before he was killed, and it really does show the kind of image overhaul, the total change in the way people perceive Martin Luther King over the decades.
Very interesting. Now, many people have something to say about this iconic figure. Many falling back on his words rather than their own. Tell us more about that.
Yes, everybody seems to be sharing quotes from Martin Luther King.
He was
and I suppose
such an incredible orator. It's still one of the
understandable,
most
really, because who is going to
recognisable.
come up with a better turn of phrase than Martin Luther King? So obviously people are sharing quotes. But his daughter Bernice, again, has taken to Twitter today to say that the most authentic way to honour my father is to commit to the work of creating a more peaceful, just, humane world. Let quotes coincide with conscious efforts to eradicate poverty, militarism and racism. So she's saying don't just reproduce his quotes, but actually do something to reflect what the man actually stood for. Having said that, this is probably one of my favourite quotes that's been shared today. We need leaders not in love with money, but in love with justice, not in love with publicity, but in love with humanity. Now, that particular image was shared by Rosie O'Donnell, an actress and comedian who's particularly critical of Donald Trump, the US president. Now, he was stuck really between a rock and a hard place today, because had he not tweeted, people would accuse him of being racist. Having tweeted, they then accused him of being a hypocrite. And he really couldn't have got this right today. Whatever he had done, there was going to be criticism of him without question. But what a lot of people are unhappy about is the fact that in the statement he's released, he said that we must denounce racism, inhumanity and all those things that seek to divide us. Many people saying that it is Donald Trump who is doing more to sow division within the United States than anyone else right now.
Emma James, thanks a lot for that look back at today's commemorations, which of course will go on for the coming days. Thanks for that.